Tonight we begin with a development that U.S. officials, regional analysts, and intelligence insiders had feared, tracked, and never fully prepared for. A strike that unfolded not over weeks of deliberation, but in a single afternoon. Hours that shook the foundations of the Islamic Republic. Hours that left 88 clerics scrambling for their lives in Qom. Hours that rewrote what this conflict is now about. What Israel did today crossed a line that even Washington had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Iran did not hesitate. They responded with fury, defiance, and a vow of total revenge. For days now, there had been signals. Not from state television, not from official communiques, just quiet signals that Israel was preparing something unprecedented. Precedented. Israel has been aggressive, yes, but it has been calculated in its aggression. Its moves have followed a certain logic, a rhythm, almost a doctrine. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and across the Gulf this week was that the rhythm went silent. Analysts who monitor Israeli targeting patterns know the indicators. The forward deployment of F-35 squadrons, the repositioning of intelligence assets near Iranian borders, the unusual communication blackouts between Tel Aviv and allied capitals, the sudden disappearance of Israeli officials from public view, all of that went quiet. And whenever Israel goes quiet, it means something is about to get very loud. Early Tuesday, Israeli defense officials confirmed what they described as a precision airstrike on the Assembly of Experts building in Qom, including a direct hit on the chamber where senior clerics had gathered to do something that had not been done in over 35 years. Choose a new supreme leader of Iran. These are the kinds of targets that Israel only strikes when they are signaling something very specific. Regime disruption, leadership decapitation, or a message that no succession will be permitted unchallenged. Observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Israel was changing its entire strategic posture. And when a military power of Israel's capability shifts posture without warning, even by a single strike, the entire region pays attention. Iran's response tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was existential. Officials in Tehran, after emergency session, described Israel's strike as barbaric, illegal, under international law, and perhaps most importantly, a direct attempt to prevent Iran from governing itself, but shock only works if the target freezes. Iran did not freeze. In fact, their response today was among the most sweeping retaliatory campaigns we've seen since the conflict began 5 days ago. Here's what we know. Within hours of the Qom strike, Iran launched fresh missile salvos toward Israeli population centers. These weren't warning shots. These were ballistic missiles, systems that Iran only deploys when it is preparing to cause maximum damage and send a maximum message. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that Iran launched retaliatory strikes on Israel, while simultaneously intensifying attacks on Gulf Arab nations, including strikes on Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, and Bahrain's capital Manama. Israel struck before Iran could reconstitute its leadership council. They hit the Assembly of Experts building. They hit defense ministry infrastructure. They hit communications networks that were likely being used to coordinate the succession process. In other words, Israel targeted the political nervous system of the Islamic Republic, the infrastructure that would have made a new supreme leader's authority operational. This is what made the international community's alarm so acute. Israel's strike wasn't ceremonial. It was functional. It represented the kind of blow that could fracture Iran's government from within if left unanswered. And Iran, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not blindly, not randomly, but with strategic escalation. They didn't target empty fields. They didn't fire into the sea. They hit Israeli cities. They hit Gulf partners whose airspace Israel depends upon. And here's where the story becomes even more consequential. Intelligence analysts now believe Israel's strike on the Assembly of Experts was designed to test the cohesion of Iran's transitional government after the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei just 3 days ago. Israel wanted to see whether Iran's three-member leadership council, hastily assembled on Sunday, would fracture under pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. Iran's president, chief justice, and guardian council representative didn't collapse. They issued a unified statement so firm, so coordinated, that even Israeli officials took note. You don't get a shattered government to speak with one voice easily, but today, Iran did. Analysts speaking with regional media under anonymity described Iran's posture as coerced consolidation, a way of forcing internal unity through external threat. But Israel proved today that they remain both willing and capable of escalating further. Their strikes were not only precise, they were timed so strategically that they landed while votes for the next supreme leader were actively being counted. That timing matters because it shows Israel has real-time intelligence penetration inside Iran's most sensitive institutions. It shows that Israel is not reacting, it is directing the tempo of this conflict. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of this escalation. Iranian drones targeted Saudi Aramco's Reyes Tanura refinery, forcing an emergency shutdown of the facility. Iranian missiles struck Gulf Cooperation Council cities that had been at elevated security alert in the last 72 hours. Iranian proxy forces operating in Yemen reportedly activated drone swarms used by Tehran to pressure the broader U.S.-aligned regional architecture. This wasn't just a bilateral conflict. This wasn't just Israel versus Iran. This was a regional war. This was a test of the entire post-Abraham Accords order. And that order is the one thing Iran has struggled to undermine since the normalization agreements began. For every military setback they have absorbed, Iran is countered by widening the theater, pulling in more fronts, more actors, more pressure. Remember, Iran thought the killing of Khamenei would paralyze them. They thought a transitional council would be seen as illegitimate. They thought the loss of their supreme leader would trigger internal collapse. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Iran has declared 40 days of national mourning and used it to rally domestic support. Iran has launched its most geographically widespread retaliation since this conflict began. And Iran's provisional leadership is speaking with a unity that surprises even seasoned analysts. What makes this moment so volatile and so dangerous is that Israel's latest escalation happened at a time when Iran's transitional government is under immense internal pressure. Reformists want a de-escalation to preserve the state. Hardliners want total war to avenge Khamenei's death. The IRGC wants operational authority without civilian oversight. The clerical establishment wants to choose the next supreme leader without foreign interference. Iran's Leadership Council is balancing these demands while simultaneously managing the largest military crisis in the Republic's history. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The Gulf Cooperation Council's warning, now distributed to all member states, was designed to signal that the Arab world is not willing to absorb Iranian retaliation indefinitely. GCC officials said plainly that Iran's missile strikes on Gulf cities were inconsistent with the principles of good neighborliness and regional stability. That is diplomatic language for, do it again. And we move from warnings to military response. You don't usually hear that tone from the Gulf states unless something existential is at stake. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation in a resolute, unambiguous speech. He said, with these ballistic missiles, these weapons of mass death, they bombed all these countries. He said, Iran's nuclear program would have been immune in months. We could not allow that. And he said, this is what President Trump understood, and this is what we acted upon together. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a government that understands just how irreversible the threshold it has crossed has become. Here's what makes the situation even more alarming. Israel's strike on Qom wasn't isolated. Along with that primary strike, Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen also activated drone attacks on Red Sea shipping lanes. Hezbollah remnants increased rocket fire, targeting northern Israeli communities. Iranian cyber units increased offensive operations, targeting Gulf financial infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 24-hour window. When Iran moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is being orchestrated, not improvised. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing a massive coordinated missile strike, something larger than anything it has launched so far. as a final show of deterrence. Another is that Iran is attempting to internationalize the conflict by pulling Russia and China into formal diplomatic pressure on Washington. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is attempting to accelerate its nuclear timeline in secret, using the chaos of war as cover. But today, Israel took that third card off the table by striking at Iran's decision-making infrastructure directly. They didn't sanction, they didn't issue ultimatums, they didn't wait for UN condemnation. They struck at the heart of the succession. What we're watching now is a test of institutional survival. Iran wants to show that it can replace its supreme leader without external interference. Israel wants to prove that no Iranian leadership transition happens on Tehran's terms alone. The United States wants to prevent this from becoming a multi-decade entanglement, and the Gulf states want to prevent their cities from becoming collateral in a war they didn't start. Tonight we've heard from intelligence officials who are now monitoring Iran's assembly of experts members for secondary movement and emergency relocation. They say the succession vote has been suspended. They say Iran's transitional council is meeting in an undisclosed location. And they say Iran's decision to continue retaliatory strikes is likely part of a pressure strategy intended to force a ceasefire on terms favorable to Tehran before a new supreme leader is chosen. But Israel is not standing down. In fact, Israel is accelerating. Their response today, precise, timed, and deeply informed, sent a message to Iran that no institution is beyond reach. And it sent a message to Washington that Israel intends to define the endgame of this conflict on its own terms. As the coming days unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Israel hoped to achieve by striking the assembly of experts during an active succession vote. But what we do know is that Israel's escalation was deliberate. It disrupted Iran's political continuity. It demonstrated unparalleled intelligence penetration, and it raised the stakes of this conflict to a level that makes a simple ceasefire nearly impossible. What happens next will depend on what Iran does in the next 48 to 72 hours. If they absorb the strike and pursue back-channel negotiation, this moment will be remembered as the turning point toward an endgame. If they escalate further, Israel and the United States have already shown they are prepared to respond at every level. And tonight, for the first time since this conflict began, Iran's regime appears to be not just wounded, but genuinely uncertain. Calm is quiet, too quiet. And when Iran goes quiet after a strike of this magnitude, it means they are not retreating, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move with extreme care. Because tonight, Iran learned something it may have underestimated, that Israel will strike any institution, political, military, or clerical. That intelligence reach now extends into Iran's most sacred decision-making chambers, and that the rules of this conflict are being written in real time by the side willing to go furthest. This story is far from over, but tonight one thing is clear. The Islamic Republic is fighting for more than territory. It is fighting for its own succession. Israel has decided that succession is a military objective, and the world is watching to see who blinks first. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.